Welcome to Take It from the Ironwoman. My name is Susanne Müller, your host and the Ironwoman. This podcast is about empowering yourself and others to make real changes in the world. You will hear from everyday, smart, sophisticated, hip people like you and me. Not everybody has to be an Ironwoman to impress the world. Together, we will learn from the sports and business leaders how you can become a more successful person as an entrepreneur or a leader. It's one step at a time, one day at a time. Take your steps now. Take your big steps now. Join me on this journey to success. Take it from the Ironwoman, a very special episode today. Finally, we have somebody who ventured out to Antarctica. Julia Reinhart, she will tell us the story, how it all came about, and take us on a journey to Antarctica. Welcome, Julia. I'm very happy to have you. Introduce yourself. What can we learn from you? How was it in Antarctica?
Well, first, thank you for having me. It's very nice to be here. Well, it's definitely a challenge in a lot of ways to go to a place like that because there is no actual civilization in Antarctica. People who have been to Burning Man will recognize the concept of radical self-reliance. What you don't bring, you won't have. The preparation is a journey already because you're only allowed one bag and a carry-on. And when you go mostly on these trips, what do you bring so that you can actually survive in an unhospitable environment for 3-4 weeks? Not to be cold, but have enough of everything. It takes a lot of planning. And also, you'll be very far away if you need help. It's sort of getting over yourself and just venturing out. That's definitely part of the journey. Even though you obviously don't travel there on your own. There are some people who actually walk across Antarctica, but mostly you go there in groups. So there is some safety in numbers. But still, if you have a medical emergency, then the whole group needs to go back to civilization. So that's also a consideration. You need to make sure that you are able physically and mentally to deal with being somewhere where if you need help, it may not be there.
Everybody thinks, oh, Antarctica sounds like romantic. Yes, it might be a little cold. Now you say only one bag, one carry-on. What do you pack? How do you prepare? And the mental strength that you need to pack as well.
Layers is the answer, really. If it's colder, you just put more things on. And if it's warmer, you take a few layers off. That is actually, so several thinner layers actually give you good warmth. And then also you have to think about the materials that you're using, natural wool, for example, or depending a little bit. If you're more stationary, you stand, you do short walks, then wool is very good. If you do a real expedition and you're actually going to walk across Antarctica or so, then you probably need more synthetics because wool has higher friction and people actually can develop sores from the friction. It's definitely a layers, different, capturing the air around the body so that your own body warmth can be preserved as well as possible. It's not that cold in their summer because now, December, January, temperature can actually, on the coast, go up to almost 0 degrees, so 0 Celsius. Further inland, it's colder. Usually, people don't go there. They go there between October and March. That's sort of the season where, unless you're on one of the research stations where you're actually going to spend the winter, then October to March is about the time you can go visit. When I was there October, November, so we had maybe 5 Celsius below during the day and 20 at night if you're in Switzerland in the mountains. But it's obviously in the ship, it's warm, but out as soon as you leave the confine of the ship, then it's going to be cold. It can be very windy. So you definitely need a windproof layer. And sometimes you have to wear 2-3 hats just to make sure that your head is warm because you lose a lot of warmth through your head. If you have different layers that you can combine in different ways, you don't need 15 things of everything. I had 2 sets of undergarments. I had 2 different types of insulation layers and then the waterproof layer for the outside and then a backup waterproof layer in case the one was wet and hadn't dried yet and I had to go out again because there's no harbors. So you can't just, a ship can't just go and moor somewhere. If you want to go on land, you have to get off the ship into a little Zodiac rubber boat take that to the shore, put your rubber boots on, go in the water and go walk on land, because that's the only way you're going to get to land. And then especially the Antarctic Peninsula, which is the part that's closest to Chile, because Chile and Argentina are sort of where most trips start, because it's the physically closest, and also the passage is sort of the safest. Even people who come from Australia or from Africa, they often go first to South America and traverse down from there, because that passage is safer than if they come from the other areas.
And how far is it Chile then to Antarctica?
It's about a 3-day by boat. I don't know what it's in kilometers, but our boat took 3 days one way. And
what do you see in those 3 days? I'm always amazed. What is happening in those 3 days?
There's basically a lot of water, but also there's actually animals. There's a remarkable number of animals. Lots of birds, seabirds, the type of birds that spend the majority of their life at sea, in flight. For example, albatrosses, but also there's skuas, there's 40, 50 different types of birds that actually live in that area. And there's 2 that actually hatch on Antarctica. On all the others, they go to Chile or else further north to do their hatching and then come down during the summer. For example, albatrosses, they go all the way to Scotland, some of them, to do their hatching, and then they fly back to Antarctica for the summer. Some people also go first to the Falklands or to an island called South Georgia, where that's one of the, basically there's 12 people living and 5 million birds on that island. A lot of penguins, but also lots of albatrosses. You see that, and actually we had an ornithologist on our trip. He was doing a study of like the populations of birds in the spring, like who was already there and how many and where we first saw them, on which sort of latitude and longitude. So we spent a lot of time during the passage out on deck counting birds and just seeing if you can identify the birds and see how many. And we sort of kept checklists and took pictures of that. There's no landscape to see because it's just water for 3 days. But also there's lots of clouds. We had a meteorologist on board who was helping NASA improve a satellite, who was taking pictures from above. And we knew whenever the satellite would actually pass right above, we would take pictures from underneath so they could compare to see if the satellite had identified the type of cloud correctly and the density of the clouds. We would then send these photos to NASA. So just ships, when they go to Antarctica, need to have a scientific purpose. You can't just show up there sort of as a tourist in that sense, even though there are cruises down to Antarctica. But even those always have to pursue some kind of scientific missions. A lot of them have lectures on the history of Antarctica, all the different explorers that went down there, and also the people that tried to reach the South Pole, Amundsen and Scott and all that. You learn a lot about sort of what has happened, but also about the wildlife and the climate and geology. There's actually several active volcanoes in Antarctica. The last outbreak was in 1968. And there was one research station from the British research station on Deception Island that was actually destroyed. Luckily, they saw it coming, so they could flee to an Argentinian station that was nearby. But it's still an active volcano area. Antarctic Peninsula is very mountainous. The highest mountain tops are 5,000 meters. There's a lot still going on.
Kind of, you come from a world and you see a totally different world opening up to you.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. And even though you think, okay, there's no trees, there's no plants, but actually there's a lot of different plants. There's several kinds of mosses and small things that are locked in under the ice. And there are some areas, some rocks that actually become bare in the summer. And then there's small little things that actually grow there. There's more life in Antarctica than you think. We were a little early to see all the whales, even though we saw one that was very rare, and our marine biologist was very happy to see that. It was a beaked Arnu whale, which people didn't actually know that they would go down to Antarctica. They thought they went further north. That we actually met them this far south was quite a sensation. You don't go there just as a tourist. You have to sort of engage in the science and the knowledge and all that to really appreciate the place.
Yeah. And for the listeners, Julia actually is a professional photographer. And that's why I've been following you for a long time, enamored with all your fantastic pictures. How is it then, that trip as a photographer?
Oh, it's a sort of a never-ending smorgasbord. You have to be interested in landscapes. That is really what you can see there, wildlife and landscapes. Those are the two kinds of photography that you can do down there. But there's so much to see, even though the color palette is very different because there's no green, there's very little, there's some yellow, mostly white and blue and black.
Mm-hmm.
You have to sort of rethink a little bit how you look at landscapes and what's interesting. Obviously, icebergs are endlessly fascinating to me. And I've been to Iceland. And living in Sweden, I have gone above the Arctic Circle. I've been in northern Norway, all the way up to the top. Snow and ice has always been fascinating to me, also growing up in Switzerland with the mountains and the glaciers. And glacier ice is actually what you see a lot. There's a lot of blue, dark blue glacier ice. There's icebergs. And the water is so clear that you can actually see, even if you're on the boat, you can see under some of the iceberg that's underneath the water.
Mm-hmm.
It's very fascinating to see that. And the shapes of icebergs. I mean, there's faces, there's statues, there's Mother Nature's an artist, and it's a privilege to be able to witness that.
What do you do when it gets dark, or what do you eat on the boat? Like, that's another planning.
Well, we had a cooking staff with us, and especially most people who will go to Antarctica, if they go on a cruise, then there obviously is a full service kitchen there.
Mm-hmm.
Most trips are between 2 to 4 weeks, unless they have like a longer, and then it gets a little trickier if you go above 4 weeks, because keeping things fresh, and you have to freeze things. We had everything. We had vegetables, we had fish and meat, because we actually started our trip in Chile. We went along the Chilean coast, and we did a couple of stops there just to go walk in the national park there around Torres del Paine, which is one of the famous Patagonian landscapes. Then in one of the last ports, that's why we actually bunkered all the food for the Antarctica journey. So we had to have food for about 2.5 weeks. You could see, so towards the end of the journey, the salad was a little, but still the cook did an amazing job in keeping us fed and having a variety. So it wasn't the same thing every day. There's breakfast, there's lunch, there's dinner. Yeah, a lot of meat, because it's easier to sort of put in the fridge and freezer than maybe fish.
Mm-hmm.
Some fish.
And at the beginning, you mentioned the mental strength or the mental ability. Tell us a little bit about that. It's a lonely place, but you go with a few people.
It is a lonely place because you're very far from home, and you do notice that on occasion. But also, at the same time, you're not alone. There are other people around you, but still, sort of, you're way out of your comfort zone. And because it's really not a place where people live. There are few people who spend the winter in those research stations, but it's not a habitable area in as such. Because nothing grows. You can't grow your own crops. Everything has to be imported. In that sense, it's a bit like going to the moon. Just the concept of being far from civilization, being far from safety net, the things that you're used to. Thanks to Starlink, there is now limited internet available, but there's no phone service if you need to call for help. Obviously, a satellite phone. The pilot had a satellite phone, so if we needed help, he could have called for it. But still, it's out of helicopter range from Chile, so it's going to take a while until help arrives. You have to kind of remember that. So even if you go out and you're adventurous and you do things, you have to make sure that you're safe in a way, so that you can stay there and complete your trip and not having to take everybody home. I'm in some Facebook groups of people who travel to Antarctica, and every year there is tours that have to turn around because there's some medical emergency that can't be treated on the boat. We did have a doctor on the ship. Cuts and bruises obviously could be treated, but if you take a serious fall and you have a major breakage that needs operation, surgery, then the ship has to go back. Weather is obviously a big factor and it can turn very quickly. So we had one day, it was so perfect. There was absolutely no wind. There were reflections. It was so beautiful. It actually physically hurt. And then towards the evening, the captain came and said, we have two choices. Either we stay here and spend the last day of our trip doing duffing around, but that means we will have to confront 60 knot winds and 40-foot waves on the way home. Or we go now. What do you want to do? And then people looked at each other and said, we should probably go home. Because 60-foot, 40-foot waves, especially in a smaller boat, you feel it. Even if it's safe, even if the boat can handle it, it's not fun. We all had our pills, we had our bandages. Sometimes you just have to go lie down because it's the only way to deal with the waves. Weather can turn very quickly. So just because you're somewhere and it's beautiful and it's sunny and suddenly you get locked in by ice and then you're stuck there for 2 days, place basically wants to kill you. And that's where the mental strength is required, that now it's quiet, but it may be different in 2 hours. Let's enjoy what we have in front of us. And let's keep an eye out in case things change.
I want to thank you so much for all the insights. I have learned so much. And I would love to go because it's fantastic that you can go almost like with a scientific crew. You meet people that you probably never would meet. And you can also be part of like some experiments, it sounds like.
The Antarctic Treaty only allows people to go there with a scientific purpose. And that makes it a very different kind of traveling. I went to university and I've always been interested in knowing things and learning things. And I'm still a very curious mind. I didn't know much about seabirds, and I'm definitely no expert still, but I know a lot more now than I did before I went on this journey. One thing that's happening right now is that there's avian flu it's going down in South America, and it has arrived on the Falklands and in South Georgia, which are some of the islands that are further south. It's not quite yet in Antarctica, but they're expected to show up there through the seabirds, the migrating birds. They're very worried about that. So one thing we also did is just to check on the colonies, how are the birds behaving? Is it already there or not? It's also a very fragile place because even though it's harsh and it's brutal, the ice is melting. There's been less ice this year than ever ever since it's been measured. There's this big iceberg that broke loose. That's been moored for many, many years. It may be very different in a few years. Whatever I saw, I'm not sure if anybody else will see it the same way. We also need to be aware of the fragility of even a place that can be that harsh.
Thank you so much. This is inspiring, but also gives us some thoughts on that we want to appreciate of what we have and not complain all the time, I would think.
Yeah, no, it definitely puts you back on a lot of things in perspective of what you take for granted and what you should not take for granted.
Thank you so much for giving us a glimpse into your journey. I think we can say it is a journey that you had, a very special one.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
What are you taking away from this conversation? Doesn't sound like a trip you take every single day. You have to prepare. What do you take with you? How much is too much? What do you need? What don't you need? Take it from the Ironwoman. We have episodes every Monday. You get to know people from around the world in different languages. Where do you get that? Where can you get that for free? Join us, follow us on all the platforms that we have, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And also Take It From the Ironwoman is the book, Global Business Coaching with Sports Parallels. See you next time, and thank you so much for your support.